Howdy dowdy Bug-Buds, welcome back to yet another storytime video. This time we're going over part 2 of my Prefect Stories mini-series, so if you haven't seen part 1 yet, feel free to go back and watch that first. It might be a little difficult if you don't, just cause it does cover quite a lot of the context, but if you can't be bothered, it's pretty much as the name suggests. I accidentally became a primary school captain. As the teachers were scared the new wave of captains wouldn't be mature enough, they were given the opportunity to vote for their own candidate. And as the resident Goody Two-Shoes teacher's pet, I was elected as the second prefect, which is why I wanted to make this video, because I think it's hilarious that I, the person who was meant to be the responsible one, had more scandals than all the other members combined. So, without further ado, let's get into the mayhem. May as well start off with a bang, because this happened on my very first assembly. So at the end of year 5, our school typically held a transitional assembly. It would serve as a way for the new captain body to familiarise themselves with the general assembly protocol, and it would also be a type of farewell for the current year 6 students, who would soon be moving on to high school. And as one of the newly appointed captains, I was expected to be on stage. So the whole school and some of the parents turned up, and from there the assembly began. But because everyone just came back from recess and it was at the very end of the year, everyone was super chatty. So when Leo went up to start the assembly, he was completely shut down because no one could hear him. And because, he wanted to start the assembly, he was like, "Guys, can you please be quiet?" But the chatter wouldn't stop. In fact, it felt like it was getting louder. So then once again he repeated, "Please be quiet." But alas, that wasn't enough, so he sat back down defeated. And because we didn't know what to do, I went up and asked one of our teachers for help. But he was like, "You're the captains now, so you've got to learn to control the school by yourselves." What? So I told the others, and we decided to just one by one ask the school to quiet down. So each of us went up to ask them to quiet down, but even after all 8 of us asked the school, they kept talking. So I went back to the teachers and asked them for help. But once again, he shut me down and told me to essentially deal with it myself. So I did just that. I went up right up to the podium and loudly shouted, "Shut up!" which seemed to do the trick because the whole school went into complete and utter silence. Also, as a quick side note, I originally thought I just said quiet without the please, but when I checked with others, they were all like, "Nah, you straight up said shut up." So I guess that's what I did. Oop. Anyway, after I sat back down, the teacher immediately walked up to me and was like, "You're not off to a great start," in the most stone cold way imaginable, which made me want to cry on the inside because I was a goody-goody, Like, I very rarely got into trouble, so all I could think about was how I wanted to quit being captain. Anyway, outside of that little incident, the rest of the assembly went rather smoothly. All we had to do was read off of a script, and because the speaking roles were divided into 8 parts, it made it a lot easier to not mess up. But yeah, that embarrassing gut-wrenching feeling did not leave, so that was fun. After the assembly was done, everyone else went back to class, except for us captains, who the teachers explicitly asked to stay behind. And as you'd expect, I got scolded again. They were like, "Never, ever do that again." And I could just feel the disappointment from the teachers, who, remind you, elected me as the well-behaved one. Luckily, the other members weren't mad at me. In fact, they all found it hilarious, which seemed to be a common sentiment amongst my peers. For the rest of the day, I was constantly memed on by all my friends. Even the people on a more acquaintance level were like, "Shut up, hehe." So yeah, that's how I ended up telling the whole school to shut up. Okie dokes, so the next scandal took place about halfway into year 6. So during this period, students were becoming more and more interested in crush talk, where a bunch of students would go around group to group, asking people who they had feelings for. And as you probably would have guessed by now, this story revolves around my response. So this whole fiasco began during class time, straight after lunch. Me and a bunch of my friends were all sitting at a table, working on our art projects. And because it was an afternoon lesson, we were all allowed to talk to one another. Now, as you'd expect, the conversation quickly turned into a who had a crush on whom talk. And when one of the girls asked me who I liked, I didn't know what to say. At this point in my life, I didn't realise I was into guys. Sure, I thought Hal, Sebastian and Ace were all super hot, but I didn't connect the dots until a couple years later. Plus, because I didn't have my first identifiable crush until much later in my life, I just assumed that my quote-unquote crush would be my closest female friend. But because I was, and still am, an indecisive clown, I ended up naming my 3 closest female friends, as they were all on a similar friendship level, who, for storytelling ease, I'm going to refer to as Rose, Violet and Lily. So up first is Rose. So she was one of the other captains of the school and we were also in the same class together, so unsurprisingly I spent quite a lot of time with her both in and out of class. Then we have Violet. She was one of my first friends I made when I moved to the school, and even though we were in different classes, we still spent a fair amount of time together due to our captain duties as well as recess and lunch. Also, fun fact about Violet, she was the one who got me super into anime, and funnily enough was also the one who showed me Howl's Moving Castle. Anyway, last but not least we have Lily. So remember back in my last video where I mentioned we had peer group meetings once a week, where a boy and a girl of each grade were put into a group? Yeah, well, one thing I didn't mention was the fact that these groups alternated each year. So during year 6 when I was a peer mentor, Lily was my co-captain. So yeah, those were my 3 closest female friends at the time. Now, because no one else said they had multiple crushes, everyone on my table was quite curious to say the least. So they ended up loudly asking things like, oh, but which one's your favourite? And because I couldn't see any of them romantically, and I was super close with all 3 of them, I ended up just saying they're about equal. Anyway, the conversation soon moved on to other people's crushes, and I didn't think about it too much. Until the very next day, where the teachers announced that all crush talk was now banned. Then, right before recess began, they asked me to stay behind. And as you can probably guess, they were essentially like, it's your fault crush talk is banned. We overheard your conversation yesterday and it was very inappropriate, and all that kind of jazz. But, because people in other classes kept talking about it, on the following assembly they made a full school announcement that crush talk was now banned school-wide. And yeah, that's how I unintentionally made talking about crushes forbidden for the whole school. Also, as a quick side note, those rumours were wild. Like, they just kept adding girls to that list. There were probably 8 or 9 girls by the end of it, some of which I barely even talked to. And it was even more awkward when one of the girls put herself on the list for some weird bragging right. Like, that girl was straight up sitting at our table when we were talking about our crushes. In fact, I'm pretty sure she was the one who asked me. So she 100% knew who I said. So yeah, that was interesting to say the least, but it is what it is, just kids being kids. Not like I'm one to judge considering how cringy I was, and still am. Rightio, up next we have the mystery of the Dax mannequin. So, in our school's central office, there were 2 main mannequins, one displaying the boys' uniform and one displaying the girls'. And at some point in year 6, someone began daxing the mannequins. Now, I don't really know what it's called in other places, but where I grew up, the act of pulling one's shorts or pants down was referred to as daxing, so that's what we're talking about here. Anyway, the first time it happened, the teachers didn't really care, they just pulled them back up and moved on with their day. But then, it happened a couple more times, and the teachers got increasingly more suspicious. Surprisingly, they did give our cohort the benefit of the doubt, because they then went to check if the elastic was the problem. And I only know this because they asked me to try them on. But the elastic was fine, so now they realised that someone was intentionally daxing the mannequins. The only problem was that they didn't know who was doing it. And to make matters worse, the daxing just kept getting more and more intense. No matter how many times they fixed the mannequin, their shorts and skirts would always end up on the ground. I'm talking multiple times a day. And this is where I come in. So remember back in my last video where I mentioned I used to play music to indicate when recess and lunch were ending? Yeah, well, that room was also in the school's central office. And because I was in the office more than any other person, I got blamed for it. Yeah, a couple weeks later, the teacher pulled me aside and was like, stop pulling the mannequin shorts down, it's incredibly immature of you. And I just sat there completely gobsmacked because it wasn't me. Like, I never did it, I never saw who did it, and somehow I'm getting blamed for it. It wasn't until a couple weeks later when the real culprit was revealed, and it turned out to be some random SRC member. She used to access the office printer a lot as she was responsible with providing handouts to the teachers, and whenever she went in, she would secretly use the opportunity to dax the mannequins. So yeah, case closed. I think the most annoying part about this story was the fact that even after they found out the culprit, they doubled down and said it was still partly my fault. Apparently, they thought I was hiding her identity and that I somehow secretly actually knew she was the one doing it, when I didn't. Like, seriously? Well, if you thought I couldn't get another thing banned, guess again. So, my school went through a very big Beyblade phase. It was quite popular amongst all cohorts, but it was most infamously associated with ours. Now, if you're not familiar with the series, Beyblade are essentially complex customizable spinning tops. But, because you had to buy separate stadiums to play them on, and the shape of said stadiums made it difficult to bring them in, a lot of students would just play on the ground. But, in doing so, you would also lose the fun of battling, as they would just be stamina matches. So I came up with an idea. I took off the lid of a nearby bin and began using it as a stadium. The shape was just perfect for constant battling. But, once we started doing it, all the other Beyblade fans began using bin lids as stadiums too. And obviously, the teachers caught on. So, in one of the subsequent assemblies, the teachers announced that there would be a school-wide ban on Beyblade too, which honestly, I can't even blame them for, what with all the germs and hygiene issues and whatnot. Yeah, so that was my bad. But, on the bright side, I didn't get in trouble with this one. I think because there were so many groups doing it, they couldn't be bothered tracking down the root student. But yeah, for once I wasn't scolded, which was pretty good for me considering my track record. So, I've been a Pokemon fan for as long as I can remember, and when I was a youngling, I really liked to play make-believe. So when I was in year 6, I would often play imaginary Pokemon battles with my fellow peers. We would run around, call out attacks, and do all that kind of cringy stuff. But during one recess in particular, I was asked to stay back to have a talk with the teachers, and it was a questionable talk. They mentioned that a parent complained about me because I was promoting witchcraft, and wanted to ask about it as I was a school prefect and, supposed to be a model student. But when I told them I was just playing Pokemon, they just laughed and were like, oh, never mind then. So yeah, nothing really came out of that. But I just thought it was hilarious that some religious lady bothered calling the school to complain about me for playing make-believe Pokemon, because they were that scared their child would pick up on witchcraft, because apparently they're the same thing. And that takes us to the end of this video. Now, there are some other minor scandals, like how I got in trouble for writing without a pen license, or how I would occasionally open up the sports shed to take out some equipment during recess and lunch, which I was allowed to do, mind you, but miscommunication between teachers meant I got in trouble for it anyway. But that's pretty much the gist of it. Anyway, what have we learned from this video? That I was a little troublemaker who made the teachers regret ever picking me as their quote-unquote responsible member. That said, I would like to take this time to say I really appreciate it if you made it this far. I know it's been quite a while since my last video, and I'm sorry it has taken me this long. As for why, I'm not going to go super into the details, but it's mainly because work has been very busy lately, and I just simply don't have as much time to work on videos. That said, I still love making videos, and even though they're released at a much slower rate, I do plan on continuing, so you don't need to worry on that end. Anyway, if it's not too much trouble, feel free to like, subscribe, and comment down below. It's the best way to support the channel. And with that crossed off, stay safe and don't let the bed bugs bite. Love you all, bye bye!